Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the ocean, completely empty just yesterday, is now filled with eyes staring back at you. With claws. With jaws. With bodies that had never existed before. That is exactly what happened on this planet 538 million years ago. And in geological terms, it happened overnight. We step into Earth's most violent creative explosion, an event so strange, so rapid, and so unexplained that it has shaken the foundations of evolutionary biology for over 150 years. By the end of this video, you will understand why some scientists think the invention of the eye triggered an arms race so brutal it reshaped every living thing on Earth, and why others think something far stranger was at work. We're going to meet creatures so bizarre that when scientists first reconstructed them, audiences laughed. We're going to trace a direct line from a thumbnail-sized swimmer in a half-billion-year-old sea to the body you're sitting in right now. And we're going to sit honestly with the fact that the deepest question at the center of all this remains, officially, genuinely, unanswered. Actually, before we dive in, I need to correct something. Most people call this a sudden explosion. I've even framed it that way in earlier videos. But 20 million years isn't sudden to us. It's longer than mammals have existed in their current major forms. So let me explain what sudden actually means in geological time, because that difference matters enormously for everything that follows. When geologists say the Cambrian explosion was rapid, they mean rapid relative to the 4.5 billion year history of this planet. 20 million years is roughly 0.4% of Earth's total age. Imagine compressing all of Earth's history into a single calendar year. The Cambrian explosion would occupy about 1.5 days. That's what rapid means here. And once you feel that scale, once it actually lands, everything else about this story becomes even more extraordinary. For 3 billion years, life on Earth did almost nothing with itself. I want you to really sit with that sentence. 3 billion years. Life appeared on this planet roughly 3.8 billion years ago, simple, single-celled microbes, bacteria and archaea, living in oceans that looked nothing like the ones we know. And for the next 3 billion years, the dominant life form on Earth was essentially slime. Microbial mats. Thin films of single-celled organisms coating rocks on the seafloor, photosynthesizing, doing chemistry, doing nothing else. No movement. No hunting. No complexity worth measuring. Just existence, patient and enormous and almost entirely invisible to any future observer. Geologists have an affectionate name for the period roughly between 1.8 and 0.8 billion years ago. They call it the boring billion. That's not a metaphor or a casual nickname, that's the actual technical term used in the scientific literature. The boring billion. For a full 1 billion years, the fossil record shows almost no evolutionary innovation. Life had its biochemical toolkit, it was doing fine, and it simply didn't change much. There's something almost meditative about it, if you're feeling generous. Or deeply unsettling, if you're asking what it means for the pace of evolution elsewhere in the universe. Then, starting around 635 million years ago, in a period called the Ediacaran, the first multicellular experiments began to appear. And I want to spend some real time here, because these creatures almost never get the attention they deserve. Dickinsonia looked like a bath mat. Seriously, a ribbed, oval, flat impression on the seafloor, sometimes growing up to 1.4 meters across, with bilateral symmetry and absolutely no confirmed mouth, no gut, no eyes. How it fed is still debated. Charnia resembled a fern or a feathery frond, anchored to the seafloor, swaying in currents. Sprigina looked almost arthropod-like, with a differentiated head end and segmented body, and is one of the earliest candidates for something in our ancestral neighborhood. These creatures were soft-bodied. Every single one of them. No shells. No mineralized structures. No hard parts of any kind. Here's what I find genuinely beautiful about this world, and I want to linger here for just a moment. In the Ediacaran Sea, nothing hunted anything. There were no predators. No jaws. No claws. Nothing that pursued and caught and consumed another multicellular creature. These organisms existed in a world without fear. Without the evolutionary pressure of being eaten. They were passive filter feeders drifting in a chemical ocean, or sitting on the seafloor absorbing nutrients through their surfaces. Part of me wonders, was that actually the better world? A world where complexity existed but predation hadn't yet been invented? I don't have an answer to that. But I think it's worth asking before we move on. The chemical conditions of this Precambrian ocean are crucial to understand. Atmospheric oxygen levels were possibly around 1 to 2% of today's levels. This single constraint limited biological complexity in a profound way. Oxygen is required to synthesize collagen, the structural protein that makes bodies rigid and organized. Without sufficient oxygen, you simply cannot build a complex, active, energetically expensive body. The door to animal complexity was locked. And the key was atmospheric chemistry. Two other pieces of setup matter here. First, around 700 million years ago, Earth underwent one of the most extreme climate events in its history. The entire planet froze, ice from pole to equator, a condition geologists call snowball Earth. When that glaciation finally ended, melting ice released enormous quantities of nutrients, phosphorus, calcium, into shallow coastal oceans. Calcium specifically would turn out to be extraordinarily important. It is the raw material for shells, for mineralized hard parts, for the protective and structural innovations that define what was coming. Second, life had been accumulating genetic complexity for those entire 3 billion years. The biochemical machinery for building complex bodies was, in a sense, already loaded. The regulatory genes. The developmental switches. The molecular architecture of multicellular coordination. All of it was there, waiting, underutilized, like an orchestra that had been tuning for 3 billion years without ever being permitted to play. And then, in the fossil record, in a transition so sharp you can trace it in rock outcrops around the world, the Ediacaran world ends. And something entirely different begins. The real question isn't what happened during the Cambrian Explosion. The real question is what caused it, and what had been holding it back for so long. The Cambrian period begins, precisely, at 538.8 million years ago. We know this with impressive confidence from radiometric dating of zircon crystals found in rock layers at the boundary worldwide. Zircon is remarkable. When lava cools and zircon crystals form, they lock in uranium atoms but exclude lead. As uranium decays to lead at a known rate, zircon crystals become geological clocks of extraordinary precision. The boundary between the Ediacaran and Cambrian is one of the most precisely dated transitions in deep time. The explosion of complex animal life appears to peak between roughly 521 and 509 million years ago, a window of about 12 million years within the broader Cambrian period. We can date these events to within a margin of a few million years, using crystals formed when lava cooled 500 million years ago. That precision is worth appreciating before we dive into the chaos of what those years contained. Now, what triggered it? Scientists have been arguing about this for 165 years, and I want to give you the honest picture. There is no single agreed answer. There are four major hypotheses, each with genuine evidence, each with genuine problems. The first is the oxygen spike theory. Around 540 million years ago, atmospheric oxygen levels rose sharply, possibly reaching 10 to 15% of today's levels. This unlocked collagen synthesis, enabling the construction of complex, organized animal bodies. The evidence is compelling. Carbon isotope excursions in rock records worldwide matched the timing. The locked door opened. The second is the snowball Earth aftermath theory. The end of the last major glaciation around 635 million years ago flooded shallow seas with calcium. 100 million years of calcium accumulation loaded the system. Shells became biochemically possible, and once shells were possible, the evolutionary incentive to grow them became enormous. This theory argues the explosion was chemically primed for 100 million years before it ignited. The third theory is the one that would have disturbed Darwin most deeply, which is why it's sometimes called Darwin's dilemma. Darwin himself, in The Origin of Species, described the sudden appearance of complex animal fossils in Cambrian rocks as inexplicable, his word, not mine, and acknowledged it as a valid argument against his theory of gradual evolution. The modern interpretation of his dilemma is ecological. Once the first predator appeared, it triggered a self-reinforcing arms race. Prey evolved shells. Predators evolved stronger grasping appendages. Prey evolved eyes to detect predators. Predators evolved to move faster. Eyes drove the evolution of defensive coloration. Speed drove the evolution of streamlining. Each innovation forced a response across multiple lineages simultaneously. The explosion was self-perpetuating. It wasn't one trigger, it was a chain reaction. Like the first domino, once it started, nothing could stop it. I have to be honest with you about something. When I first read about Darwin's dilemma in detail, not the simplified version, but Darwin's actual words, I felt something unexpected. I felt sorry for him. He spent his entire life constructing the most carefully evidenced theory in the history of biology, and here was this event in the fossil record that seemed to announce, in the loudest possible geological voice, that gradual change had limits. He called it inexplicable. That single word, from the most precise and cautious scientist of the 19th century, tells you more about the genuine strangeness of this event than any headline could. The fourth theory is the most dramatic of all, and we'll go deep into it shortly, but I want to plant the seed now. In 2003, Oxford zoologist Andrew Parker published a hypothesis arguing that the key innovation, the event that triggered the entire cascade, was the invention of the eye. Specifically, the first eye capable of forming a true image. Parker argued that the moment one creature could see, every other creature on Earth faced an entirely new selective pressure, be seen or not be seen. That single biological invention may have compressed millions of years of evolutionary change into millions of years, rather than hundreds of millions. It's called the light switch hypothesis. And the evidence is more compelling than I expected. But to truly understand any of these theories, to feel why they're convincing and where they break down, we need to actually meet the creatures of the Cambrian. And I need to warn you. Some of them are going to look like they came from a place that evolution was never supposed to reach. 4 theories. Each with evidence. Each with problems. Scientists have been arguing about this for 150 years without consensus. But there is one piece of evidence, sitting in a mountain in British Columbia, Canada, that changed everything we thought we knew about early animal life. And it was found because a horse tripped. In 1909, Charles Doolittle Walcott was riding a mule through the Canadian Rockies when his horse stumbled on a loose rock on the trail. The rock split. And inside it was a perfectly preserved creature from 508 million years ago, soft tissue, appendages, every detail intact, pressed into fine mudstone like a biological photograph. Walcott was the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, one of the most senior scientists in America, and what he had just found would become the greatest paleontological discovery of the 20th century, the Burgess Shale. Walcott spent years excavating the site, eventually collecting over 65,000 specimens from a hillside in British Columbia. But his interpretation, shaped by the scientific framework of his time, was conservative. He tried to fit everything he found into existing animal categories. This looks like a crustacean, this resembles a worm. He wasn't wrong to try. He was just working with the wrong assumption. The reassessment came decades later. Beginning in the early 1970s, Harry Whittington at Cambridge began re-examining Walcott specimens with fresh eyes and modern techniques. His students, Simon Conway Morris and Derek Briggs, joined the project. What they found over the following 2 decades was genuinely shattering. These weren't primitive versions of known animals. Many of them were body plans with no modern descendants whatsoever. Not simplified ancestors, architecturally alien designs that had been tried, had survived for millions of years, and had then vanished completely from the history of life. Let me introduce you to some of them, because they deserve to be described individually. Opabinia had 5 eyes arranged across the front of its head, and a long, flexible proboscis with a claw at the end, like a submarine arm for grabbing food. It swam using lateral lobes along its body. When Harry Whittington presented his reconstruction at a paleontology conference in 1972, the audience laughed. They genuinely thought he was joking. 5 eyes and a grasping vacuum cleaner arm, it sounded like a prank. The laughter stopped when he spread the fossils on the table. Hallucigenia is even more disorienting. When it was first reconstructed, scientists had it completely upside down and backwards simultaneously. They identified what were actually its legs as dorsal spines, and what were actually its tentacular feeding appendages as legs. It walked on stilts, they thought, and had tentacles growing from its back. This reconstruction appeared in textbooks and museum displays for decades. The correct orientation wasn't confirmed until 2015, when researchers used an electron microscope at sufficient magnification to locate its actual eyes, tiny dots at one end of the body that identified the head. We had this animal wrong for 40 years. Something about Hallucigenia genuinely unsettles me in a way I keep returning to. Scientists had this fossil. They published papers. They built reconstructions that went into museums and textbooks. They were confident. And they were wrong in the most fundamental possible way, wrong about which end was the front and which side was the top. Which makes me wonder, what are we getting wrong right now, today, with the same degree of confident wrongness? That question keeps me humble every time I think I understand something. Anomalocaris is in a different category entirely. It was the apex predator of the Cambrian Ocean, reaching up to 1 meter in length, which made it by far the largest creature alive at the time. It had compound eyes containing up to 16,000 individual lenses, more sophisticated optical equipment than most modern insects. It had circular, disc-like jaws with radiating plates, and a pair of grasping frontal appendages for seizing prey. Here is the extraordinary part of its discovery story. Its claws, its mouth disc, and its body were initially described as 3 completely separate animals. The claws were classified as a crustacean. The mouth was identified as a jellyfish. The body was listed as a sponge. For years, 3 different species names existed in the scientific literature for what was, in fact, the same creature. The first predator on Earth was so alien in its construction that no one could tell its parts belonged together. Wiwaxia was covered in mineralized scales and defensive spines, resembling a living medieval weapon with no clear relationship to any surviving animal group. It crawled on the seafloor, consuming organic material, effectively armored against the Anomalocaris of its world. Stephen Jay Gould visited the Burgess Shale story in his 1989 book Wonderful Life and made an argument that became one of the most debated ideas in modern evolutionary biology. He contended that the Burgess Shale creatures represented something extraordinary, more fundamentally different body plans than exist in all of today's animal kingdom combined. He called it disparity without diversity. And his central thesis was that which of these body plans survived the Cambrian was essentially random, a lottery. If you replayed the tape of life, running evolution again from the same starting conditions, you'd get a completely different outcome. The survivors weren't the fittest. They were the lucky. Conway Morris, who had worked alongside Gould as Whittington's student, disagreed profoundly. He argued that many Burgess Shale creatures can be placed within modern lineages on closer examination, and that convergent evolution demonstrates that life tends towards certain solutions repeatedly regardless of contingency. The two scientists had an increasingly public and occasionally sharp debate that ran through the 1990s. Science at its most human, two brilliant people, looking at identical fossils, reaching opposite conclusions about what those fossils meant for the nature of evolution itself. Among all these extraordinary creatures, the five-eyed swimmers, the upside-down animals, the predator whose parts were catalogued as 3 different species, one innovation stands above everything else. One thing that, once it existed, made the world fundamentally more dangerous. And also, in a way that took me a while to articulate, more interesting. We've mentioned the eye hypothesis. Now let's go deep into it. Because the evidence is more compelling than I expected when I started researching this. The eye has evolved independently at least 40 times in different animal lineages. Not 40 variations on one ancestral eye, 40 separate evolutionary origins, in groups that share no recent common ancestor, arriving at vision through completely distinct developmental pathways. Simple light-detecting patches. Pit eyes. Pinhole eyes. Compound eyes. Camera-like eyes with lenses. Mirror eyes. Every major optical design that physics allows, evolution has discovered at least once, and usually multiple times. This convergence is telling us something. There is massive, consistent, relentless selective pressure toward vision. Seeing is so valuable that evolution keeps reinventing it. The oldest sophisticated eyes in the fossil record belong to Anomalocaris. In 2011, researchers working with material from South Australian shales dating to 515 million years ago found fossilized compound eyes with up to 16,000 lenses, resolution comparable to modern dragonflies. The first predator, the very first creature in Earth's history that actively hunted other animals, was already equipped with better optical hardware than most creatures alive today. The hunting that drove the Cambrian arms race was happening with extraordinary visual precision from the very beginning. Andrew Parker's light switch hypothesis, laid out in his 2003 book In the Blink of an Eye, makes a specific and testable argument. Before true image-forming eyes existed, all animals lived in what Parker calls a contact world. You found food by touching it, by following chemical gradients, by detecting pressure waves in water. The world had no visual dimension. There was no such thing as color as a signal, no such thing as visible movement as a threat, no such thing as being watched. Then the first eye capable of forming a true directional image appeared. And in that moment, an entirely new dimension of information opened up, and an entirely new category of danger. Any creature that could now be seen faced lethal predation pressure it had never faced before. Any creature that could see gained predatory and navigational advantages so enormous they would dominate any ecosystem. The resulting selection pressure was so intense, Parker argues, that it compressed what might otherwise have been hundreds of millions of years of gradual evolutionary change into a geological instant. I want to guide you through a thought experiment, because I think it's the clearest way to feel what Parker is describing. Imagine the prevision ocean. You exist by chemistry. You find food by following dissolved nutrients. You avoid harm by detecting pressure changes in the water. There is no concept of being watched. You could be bright red, covered in patterns, slow-moving, none of it matters because nothing can see you. Now introduce one creature with a functioning image-forming eye. Suddenly, being bright red is a death sentence. Being slow is a death sentence. Being unprotected from above is a death sentence. Every ecological relationship in that ocean changes simultaneously, not because the animals changed, but because the information available to one of them changed. The invention of the eye didn't just change how animals perceived the world. It changed what the world selected for. What makes this genuinely melancholy, and I want to sit with this for a moment, because I think it deserves it, is what it implies about the nature of consciousness. Parker's hypothesis means that the world became more dangerous the moment life became able to see it. Before vision, nothing could be hunted by sight. After vision, you were always potentially visible to something that wanted to eat you. In a very real sense, conscious awareness of the external world began with fear. The first thing any eye-possessing animal knew was that it could be seen. The birth of perception was inseparable from the birth of vulnerability. Some researchers push back on the light switch hypothesis. Nicholas Strausfeld and others have argued that complex nervous systems and protobrains evolved before image-forming eyes in some lineages, suggesting that neurological complexity, not vision specifically, was the primary driver. Chemical signaling and bioluminescence were already sophisticated in the Precambrian. The trigger may have been cognitive rather than optical. The debate is genuinely unresolved. What remains clear is that the eye, whenever it arrived, created a new set of evolutionary rules, and every creature alive today is built according to those rules. Shells. Legs. Jaws. Claws. These didn't appear gradually over hundreds of millions of years. They appear in the fossil record essentially simultaneously. As if every animal in the Cambrian Ocean received the same message at the same moment, the rules have changed, adapt immediately or disappear. How does evolution work that fast? The answer involves a discovery that turned developmental biology upside down, and it was made not in a fossil quarry, but in a genetics laboratory. In the late 1970s and 1980s, geneticists working with fruit flies began identifying genes with an extraordinary property. Mutations in these genes didn't change one part of the fly. They transformed the entire body plan. A mutation in one gene called antennapedia caused legs to grow where antennae should be. Another, Ultrabithorax, controlled whether a segment grew wings or legs or nothing. These were master regulatory genes, genes that didn't build body parts themselves, but told the embryo where to put them. Head here. Thorax here. Abdomen here. Eyes here. These became known as Hox genes. Edward Lewis, Christian Nestlane-Volhard, and Erich Wieschaus received the Nobel Prize in 1995 for the foundational work. But the truly world-changing discovery came when researchers began comparing Hox genes across species. The finding was so unexpected that it took years to fully absorb. A fruit fly's Hox genes and a human's Hox genes are nearly identical in sequence and function. The same genes, doing the same jobs. In creatures separated by 600 million years of independent evolution. You and a fruit fly build your bodies using essentially the same instruction manual. You've just been interpreting the instructions differently for 600 million years. The Cambrian connection runs through what biologists call developmental switches. Hox genes operate as on-off controls that are themselves regulated by other genes. They can be turned on or off in different cells, at different times, in different combinations. The critical insight for understanding the Cambrian is this: you don't need to evolve an entirely new gene to produce a radically different body plan. You need only to change when and where existing genes are switched on. A small mutation in a regulatory sequence, not in the gene itself, but in the instructions that govern when the gene activates, can produce enormous visible changes in body architecture. A limb appendage here becomes a sensory feeler. A gill arch becomes a jaw. An eye moves from the side of the head to the front, and binocular vision becomes possible. Here is the piece that reframes everything. Genetic analysis of living animals, working backwards through molecular clock calculations, suggests that the core Hox gene toolkit existed before the Cambrian, possibly as far back as 700 to 800 million years ago. The genetic capacity for complex, diversified body plans was present for at least 200 million years before the Cambrian explosion occurred. The toolkit was loaded. The question that remains is not how evolution built so much so fast. It had the tools. The question is what finally released the constraints that had been preventing the toolkit from being used. The field that explores these questions is called evolutionary developmental biology, EvoDevo. Sean Carroll's work on butterfly wing patterns provides one of the most striking demonstrations of its principles. Tiny changes in the timing and location of gene activation can produce massive, dramatic differences in visible morphology without altering the underlying genes at all. Evolution doesn't always build new tools. Sometimes it just reprograms the old ones. The gene PAX6 controls eye development. It is virtually identical in flies, mice, squids, and humans, animals whose eyes look completely different and evolved along entirely separate pathways. If you transplant a mouse PAX6 gene into a fly embryo, the fly grows a fly eye using mouse genetic instructions. The gene that builds your eye and the gene that builds a dragonfly's compound eye are the same gene. Not similar, the same. We share eye-building instructions with every animal that has eyes. That's not a metaphor or a philosophical point. That is molecular fact, demonstrable in a laboratory. I have to confess something about my reaction to all of this. When I first went deep into Hox genes while putting this together, I had a moment of strange deflation. Part of me had wanted the Cambrian explosion to resist explanation, to be a genuine anomaly, permanently beyond accounting for. Finding out there was a genetic mechanism that could explain the rapid diversification felt, briefly, like the mystery was being solved and therefore diminished. But then I realized, knowing how evolution could work fast doesn't explain why it worked fast at that specific moment. The mechanism doesn't close the question. It just reframes it. The wonder survives the explanation, as it almost always does. Between the Ediacaran world and the Cambrian explosion, something happened that almost never gets discussed. A mass extinction, before the explosion. And the Cambrian fauna may have replaced the Ediacaran creatures rather than descended from them. The explosion might not be a story of creation. It might be a story of what fills the space left by destruction. Around 541 million years ago, Ediacaran fossil assemblages disappear from the geological record. Not gradually, not patchily, they vanish. Dickinsonia, Charnia, Tribrachidium, the entire cast of soft-bodied organisms that had been the dominant complex life on Earth for tens of millions of years, gone. No Ediacaran body plans survive into the Cambrian with certainty. Someone pressed delete on 100 million years of biological experimentation. What killed them? Three competing explanations, each with evidence. The first is ocean chemistry. Around 541 million years ago, there was a sharp shift in ocean sulfur chemistry, detectable in sulfur isotope ratios preserved in rocks worldwide. This shift may have made shallow coastal environments toxic to soft-bodied Ediacaran life while simultaneously creating selective pressure for animals with protective mineralized hard parts. The creatures that could build shells survived a chemical transition that killed everything that couldn't. The second is more viscerally unsettling. The first Cambrian animals were bioturbators. They could burrow into seafloor sediment. This sounds like a minor capability. It was catastrophic for the Ediacaran world. The seafloor before burrowing was covered in stable microbial mats, layered biological structures that served as the primary habitat and food source for Ediacaran organisms. Once burrowing began, it physically disrupted those mats, mixed oxygen into previously anoxic sediment layers, and fundamentally altered seafloor chemistry. The Cambrian animals didn't just outcompete the Ediacaran fauna. They may have destroyed their home first. The third possibility is the most direct. The Ediacaran organisms had spent their entire evolutionary history in a world without predators. They had no escape behaviors, no defensive structures, no capacity for rapid movement. When the first active predators appeared, passive sessile organisms with no defenses were simply consumed to extinction. The first predators may have caused the first mass extinction. There is a brutal logic to this that evolutionary history would repeat, in different forms, many times afterward. There is a deeper controversy lurking here that I find genuinely vertiginous. Some researchers, most notably the German paleontologist Adolf Seilaker, argued that Ediacaran organisms weren't animals at all in the modern sense. Not plants, not fungi, not ancestors of Cambrian creatures. A fourth category of complex life that went entirely extinct without leaving descendants. A biological kingdom that existed for over 100 million years and then vanished so completely that nothing alive today carries its inheritance. If Seilaker was right, and the debate is ongoing, then the Cambrian explosion isn't the acceleration of existing life. It's the emergence of an entirely new category of life into the ecological space left by an alien world's extinction. Something about the Ediacaran extinction bothers me in a way I struggle to fully articulate. These organisms were successful by any reasonable metric. They survived for more than 100 million years, longer than mammals have existed. They were not failures. They were not primitive experiments. They were, in their world, the dominant complex life on Earth. And then they were gone. Not ancestral to anything we can clearly recognize. Not remembered in any lineage. Simply erased. I think there is a lesson about success and survival embedded in that fact that doesn't resolve into a comfortable conclusion. The transition between the Ediacaran and Cambrian is marked by what paleontologists call the small shelly fauna, a brief period between 541 and 521 million years ago characterized by tiny, isolated mineralized structures found in rocks worldwide. Tubes. Spines. Hooks. Scales. The very first hard parts in the fossil record. The problem, we often cannot determine what animal these structures came from. They appear in isolation, like a disassembled jigsaw puzzle from a box that has no picture on the lid. Life was experimenting with shells before it had determined what to put them on. The implication for understanding the explosion is significant. If the Cambrian followed a mass extinction, if the stage was cleared before the new cast arrived, then the event fits a template that Earth's history has used repeatedly. The post-dinosaur mammal radiation. The recovery after the Permian-Triassic extinction. Empty ecological space, plus new environmental conditions, plus an available genetic toolkit, equals explosive diversification. The Cambrian explosion may be less a unique mystery and more the first instance of a pattern that life returns to whenever the conditions align. The Cambrian is when life invented the head, the centralized brain, the notochord that became the spine, and the ancestor of every vertebrate, every fish, every amphibian, every reptile, every bird, every mammal, was a small, soft-bodied creature navigating a Cambrian sea. I want to introduce you to it, because meeting your oldest known ancestor is a genuinely strange experience. Pichia gracilens was found in the Burgess Shale. It is small, about 5 centimeters long, leaf-shaped in outline, moving through the water with a sinuous swimming motion. Its most important feature is a distinct notochord, a stiffening rod running along its body axis, the precursor structure to the vertebrate's spinal column. For decades, Pichia was considered the likely ancestor of all vertebrates, and Stephen Jay Gould made it the emotional center of wonderful life. His argument was stark: if Pichia had lost the Cambrian lottery, if that particular lineage had been among the extinctions rather than the survivors, there would be no vertebrates on Earth. No fish. No amphibians. No dinosaurs. No mammals. No you. A 5-centimeter swimming ribbon, 500 million years ago, may have been the condition for your existence. But Pichia's role has been complicated by a more recent discovery. In 1999, researchers working in Yunnan province in China found something extraordinary in 520-million-year-old rock, Ediacaran kaikunensis. At 2.5 centimeters long, it is now considered the earliest confirmed vertebrate, complete with a distinct head, eyes, gill pouches, and what appears to be a primitive brain. The first vertebrate on Earth was smaller than your thumbnail. Every fish, every shark, every frog, every snake, every eagle, every elephant, and every human on Earth descended from something you could cover with your fingernail. Your body carries the Cambrian explosion as its literal inheritance. Consider what you're built from, and when each element was invented. The head, the centralized arrangement of sensory organs at the front of a body, was a Cambrian innovation. Before the Cambrian, sense organs were distributed across the body or absent as complex structures entirely. The Cambrian invented frontness as a biological strategy: concentrate your eyes, your olfactory receptors, your taste detection, and your primary neural processing at one end, aim that end toward where you're going, and process the world in real time. Every vertebrate's skull is a 500-million-year-old design decision. The notochord appears in every vertebrate embryo during development, including human embryos. In adult vertebrates, it is largely reabsorbed into the intervertebral discs that cushion the spine. But during the first weeks of human embryonic development, the notochord is present and structurally essential. You built it, briefly, and then incorporated it. It is an ancient structure running through the development of every vertebrate, a molecular memory of the Cambrian chordate that first needed it. Bilateral symmetry, your left side mirroring your right, was not universal in the Ediacaran world. Many Ediacaran organisms showed radial symmetry, or no clear symmetry at all. The Cambrian locked in bilateral symmetry as the dominant body plan for active animals, and the reason is functional: bilateral symmetry is optimal for directed movement. A head at one end, a tail at the other, paired appendages on either side, this architecture is built for going somewhere specific. Every time you look in a mirror, you are observing a 500-million-year-old architectural choice. The coelom, the fluid-filled internal body cavity that allows organs to develop and move independently of the body wall, was another Cambrian-era innovation that made complex internal physiology possible. Without a coelom, you cannot have a heart that beats independently of the rest of your body. You cannot have lungs that expand and contract. You cannot have a digestive system with the room to do its work. The coelom is the architectural space inside you that made everything inside you possible. Some Cambrian lineages have survived with minimal change for 500 million years, and they are worth naming because they demonstrate that the Cambrian wasn't a temporary experiment, it produced designs stable enough to outlast nearly everything else. The horseshoe crab is virtually unchanged from its Cambrian and Ordovician predecessors. Nautilus represents a cephalopod lineage present in the Cambrian seas. Priapulid worms, obscure but still living, are nearly identical to their Cambrian ancestors. These aren't primitive survivors. They are optimal solutions. Evolution stopped modifying them because they were already right. Now I want to walk you through the direct line from the Cambrian Sea to where you're sitting. Haecoichthyes, 520 million years ago, swimming in a warm shallow sea in what is now China. To early jawless fish in the Ordovician. To jawed fish in the Silurian, the development of jaws from modified gill arches, one of the most consequential innovations in vertebrate history. To lobe-finned fish in the Devonian, with fleshy fins that could bear weight. To the first tetrapods, fish hauling themselves onto land, using modified fins that would become legs. To amniotes, who freed themselves from water for reproduction. To synapsids, the lineage that includes all mammals. To early mammals in the Mesozoic, small, nocturnal, surviving under dinosaur feet. To primates. To Homo sapiens, sitting in front of a microphone, trying to describe all of this. Every single link in that chain survived. Not one of your ancestors, not a single one, going back 520 million years, failed to reproduce before dying. Every predator missed. Every extinction event left your particular line intact. Every ice age, every mass extinction, every volcanic winter, every ocean anoxic event, through all of them, your unbroken chain of ancestors continued. The odds against the specific combination of survivals that produced you are so astronomical that the number approaches meaninglessness. And yet here you are. Human embryos at 4 weeks of development have pharyngeal arches, structures homologous to the gill arches of fish, developmental echoes of our Cambrian chordate ancestry. Human embryos have tails, which are typically reabsorbed before birth but occasionally are not. These are not accidents or vestigial curiosities. They are evidence of our shared developmental heritage with Cambrian life, replaying briefly in each human development. Every human being, in the first weeks of existence, briefly resembles a Cambrian chordate. We each recapitulate, in compressed form, 500 million years of evolutionary history. I want to be honest about something. When I assembled this section, I had a moment where I stopped and sat with it. The unbroken chain. 520 million years. I thought about all the near misses in that chain, the asteroid impacts, the glaciations, the predators that almost caught someone, the diseases that almost killed someone before they could pass on their lineage, and how any single one of them, at any point in that half-billion-year sequence, would have ended the chain entirely. The word lucky feels inadequate. I am genuinely not sure what the right word is. We know how life diversified in the Cambrian. We understand the conditions. We have the genetic mechanism. But the core question, why 20 million years rather than 200 million, or 2 billion, remains officially, genuinely open. And the most recent research suggests the answer may be stranger than any of the theories we've discussed. In 1859, Darwin wrote that the sudden appearance of complex animal fossils in Cambrian rocks was inexplicable and represented a valid argument against his theory. 165 years of subsequent paleontology, more fossils, more dating methods, more genetics, more molecular analysis than Darwin could have imagined, have given us partial answers but not a complete one. This is the most important unsolved problem in evolutionary biology. Not one of the most important. The most important. The origin of animal complexity is the central question in the history of life, and we do not have a full answer. The current consensus is what you might call the multiple causes hypothesis: oxygen, calcium chemistry, ecological feedback loops, regulatory gene evolution, and environmental perturbation from the snowball Earth aftermath all contributed simultaneously. The problem with this consensus is precisely its breadth. If everything contributed equally, you cannot design an experiment to determine which factor was decisive. Science is most comfortable with single causes and clean experiments. The Cambrian explosion insists on giving us 5 interacting variables and no laboratory. Recent findings have complicated the picture further. In 2018 and the years following, microscopic fossils from 580 to 600 million-year-old rocks in South China appeared to show animal embryos with differentiated cell types, suggesting that animal complexity predated the Cambrian by tens of millions of years. If these interpretations hold up, the explosion is partly an artifact of preservation bias. Complex animals existed earlier but left no record because they lacked hard parts. We may be studying the history of preservability as much as the history of life itself. This is a genuinely uncomfortable possibility. Are we studying the history of life on Earth, or the history of fossilization, the history of which organisms happen to leave traces that survived 500 million years of geological processing? The answer matters enormously for how we interpret every pattern in the Paleozoic record. New micro-CT scanning technology applied to Burgess Shale specimens in recent years has revealed internal structures, neural tissues, organ arrangements, gut contents, that were completely invisible to previous researchers. Creatures previously placed in entirely extinct lineages have been reclassified into surviving animal phyla. The Cambrian is still being actively reread. There are organisms in those rocks that have been excavated, catalogued, and stored in museum drawers for decades without anyone yet understanding what they are. I want to say something that might seem like an odd position to take in a science video. I am glad we don't have the full answer yet. Not because I don't want to know, I want to know more than almost anything. But there is something important about the fact that an event from 538 million years ago, in an ocean with different chemistry and different atmospheric composition than anything existing today, preserving creatures with no modern equivalents in rocks processed by 500 million years of geological activity, that this event has not been fully explained yet. The idea that we would have explained it completely by now might itself be a kind of impatience with the actual difficulty of deep time. The mystery is earned. It reflects the genuine strangeness of what happened. The Cambrian explosion is not just ancient history. It is a template. And that template has consequences for questions we're asking right now. Every major mass extinction in Earth's history was followed by a period of rapid biological diversification. The Ordovician radiation. The recovery after the Permian-Triassic extinction, the Great Dying, which killed 96% of all marine species. The Paleogene mammal radiation after the asteroid impact that ended the dinosaurs. The pattern is consistent across 500 million years: ecological void, plus environmental shift, plus available genetic architecture, equals explosive innovation. The Cambrian explosion was the first instance of this pattern. It was not the last. Earth has used this template at least 6 times. For astrobiology, the search for life beyond Earth, the Cambrian has profound implications. If complex multicellular animal life requires, as a minimum, 3 or more billion years of microbial evolution to build biochemical complexity, specific environmental thresholds of oxygen and available minerals, and ecological catalysts in the form of predation and competition, then complex animal life should be extraordinarily rare in the universe. Microbial life may be widespread wherever liquid water exists. Life capable of Cambrian-style diversification, life with eyes, legs, predators, genetic toolkits, and ecological arms races, may require conditions so specific and a timeline so long that it occurs rarely in a galaxy. We may be the only Cambrian explosion that worked in this corner of the universe. That thought does something to the scale of what we're protecting when we talk about the living world. The deepest lesson of the Cambrian explosion is about the relationship between constraint and creativity. For 3 billion years, low oxygen, limited calcium, and stable ecology prevented the genetic toolkit from producing its full range of designs. The constraint wasn't a failure of evolution. Evolution was doing exactly what it could do given the available conditions. When the constraints were released, simultaneously, in multiple dimensions, chemical, ecological, atmospheric, the response was immediate and extraordinary. The most creative period in the history of life was preceded by the longest creative drought in the history of life. The Cambrian teaches that innovation isn't a property of life in some abstract sense. It's what happens when the conditions finally allow what was already possible. We started this journey by imagining an ocean filling overnight with eyes. Now you know that ocean was real. Those eyes were real. Anomalocaris, staring through 16,000 lenses, hunting in a sea that had never known active predation before. And the creature on the other side of that stare, the small soft-bodied swimmer calculating whether to flee or freeze, is your ancestor. 500 million years of looking, leading to yours. Every major animal body plan alive on Earth today either originated in the Cambrian or traces its ancestry directly to Cambrian lineages. The 34 animal phyla, the fundamental categories of animal architecture, were all established in a window of about 20 million years. Arthropods, which include insects, spiders, and crustaceans, account for roughly 80% of all named animal species on Earth today. They are Cambrian. Mollusks, snails, octopuses, clams, are Cambrian. Echinoderms, starfish, sea urchins, are Cambrian. Chordates, every vertebrate, are Cambrian. The Cambrian explosion didn't create a handful of primitive organisms that slowly became today's diversity. It created the categories. Every animal alive today is a variation on one of the architectural themes that were invented in those 20 million years. The innovations of the Cambrian are not historical curiosities. They are the operating system running your body at this moment. Eyes, you are using them right now. The bilateral brain with centralized sensory processing that is integrating everything you're hearing, Cambrian chordate innovation. The gut with a differentiated entry and exit, Cambrian. The paired limbs that carried you to wherever you're listening from, inherited from Cambrian arthropod and chordate ancestry. The Cambrian explosion is not over. It is expressed in every living animal on Earth, every day, in every action those animals take. The Xinjiang biota in China, described in Science in 2019 and still being actively analyzed, has preserved over 4,000 specimens from 518 million years ago with soft tissue detail that includes nervous systems, eyes, and digestive organs. Multiple entirely new species are still being formally described from this single site. There are creatures in those rocks that no human being has yet examined closely enough to understand. They are waiting, in mudstone, for the researcher who will eventually discover what they are and where they fit in the history of life. Every person alive shares genetic sequences with Cambrian animals. The PAX6 gene. The Hox clusters. The gene networks controlling body axis development. These molecular sequences are 500 million years old and still active in your cells, doing the same jobs they did in Haequicthes. You are not merely descended from Cambrian life. You are Cambrian life, running on updated hardware, in a world those original creatures could not have imagined, made possible by a chain of survival so long and so improbable that the only honest response to it is something between astonishment and gratitude. I've been making videos about deep time for a while now, and every time I go deep into one of these events, I come back changed in some small way. The Cambrian did something to me this time. It made me realize that everything we consider normal about being an animal, having eyes, having legs, having a spine, having a head pointed in the direction we're going, was, at some specific moment, a radical and dangerous innovation tried by a creature that had no idea what it was starting. Nothing about the way you're built was inevitable. It was invented. Under pressure. In an arms race. By organisms that had never existed before, solving problems that had never existed before, in an ocean filling up with predators for the first time in Earth's history. We stepped into one of Earth's deepest mysteries today, an event so strange, so rapid, and so consequential that 150 years of science hasn't fully explained it. We walked through 3 billion years of near silence. We watched the first predator emerge with 16,000 eyes. We met your oldest known ancestor, a thumbnail-sized swimmer in a Cambrian sea who survived long enough for you to eventually exist. And we sat honestly with the fact that the full answer is still out there, waiting in rocks we haven't found yet, in sequences we haven't read yet, in fossils still sitting in museum drawers waiting for the right question. The Cambrian Explosion tells us something important about the nature of life itself. It doesn't innovate slowly and steadily, all the time, everywhere. It waits. It accumulates capacity. It operates under constraint. And when conditions finally align, chemically, ecologically, genetically, simultaneously, it explodes. 20 million years that changed everything that followed for the next 500 million years. That pattern has repeated. It will repeat again. We may be living through one of its iterations right now, in a medium that isn't biological, and we probably can't see it clearly, just as the Cambrian creatures had no conception of what their arms race was building toward. The mystery isn't a failure of science. It is an invitation to keep looking. And I hope today, you feel invited. Next time, we're going to the event that almost ended the Cambrian's legacy before it could build anything permanent. The Permian-Triassic extinction, 252 million years ago, the Great Dying, killed 96% of all marine species and 70% of all land vertebrates. It is the closest life on Earth has ever come to total extinction. The story of how life survived it is even stranger than the Cambrian itself. If this journey meant something, if something in this video made you look at your own hand differently, or at the next insect you see differently, knowing it carries the same Cambrian inheritance you do, share it with someone who should feel that too. And leave a comment. What was the moment that landed hardest? I read every one, and the answers always surprise me.